Hello everybody, this is Bitcoin Macro and this is the fifth video guys regarding the mini series about the correction, about the topping signals. Now we're doing the bottoming signals. This is the second one for the bottoming signals and what you could be looking at in order to buy the dip properly. So I'm not going to go into too much detail into the introduction because I suppose you have watched the previous video, but on this one what we are going to talk about is Ethereum a little bit. Then I'm going to go through some altcoin indices that I have created, the Bitcoin dominance and so on. I'm also going to be looking at the long short ratios, the funding, the discrepancies between different perpetual swaps and futures. I'm also going to be looking a little bit at the CME. Just a few details there that I didn't want to cover on the last one because I was already going overboard with time. The Bitcoin Volatility Index, and I'm also going to look at some stuff regarding certain indicators that I spoke about on the first videos, like the S2F model, the NVT, the SOPR, maybe a few more regarding the VWAP, Mega Multiple, and so on. I'm just going to try and make each point pretty brief because again, I don't want to talk too much about all the stuff. Of course, I'm going to also do the Stablecoin index like I mentioned before because I also believe the ratio between the total market cap and the stablecoin market cap is very, very important. And in my opinion, it's a very, very useful one to kind of see where the market is at each different point. Now, I'm also going to touch a little bit on the open interest with the longs because I didn't mention that before because some people have asked me, what's going on with open interest, what does that mean, and so on. So again, this is not just about predicting the future. I believe that currently the market is going to be quite choppy. I don't really believe we're going to choose a certain direction very early on. My bias currently is that maybe we go down a little bit short term and then go all the way up to potentially 47, 48k for Bitcoin and even maybe 53k. So if we maybe say that this is like the March crash, potentially this could be a very nice bounce for Bitcoin. However, I'm not as sure as alts continuing for some reasons that I'm going to talk pretty soon about. So with Ethereum, the key level guys that we have seen in this market is that the best thing about Ethereum was that you could see Ethereum pulling back all the way down to potentially this high or these highs right here. In my opinion, that was potentially the best area to start buying, even all the way up from 2000 and onwards, because again, that crash was very, very large. I don't believe that this is a normal crash for bull market, about 58-59%. That's the perpetual future on Deribit, and I'm using this for a very specific reason which I'm going to explain fairly soon. But before I move into why I've chosen this and why it does matter, we could have also potentially bought at these levels as well. Now if I use the futures on Ethereum, the main thing that we could see is that it started breaking down, like I said before, with the Bitcoin price. You could have expected potentially a move that could be measured from all the way up here and potentially go all the way down here if you had a measured move, or maybe even if you could have measured this thing right here. The way I'm measuring this, guys, is a little bit more random, but it might seem random at least, but it just depends on all the classical patterns. You don't really have to go through too much detail to understand, at least at some point, that okay, we've had this reversal, really big reversal. Once that breaks, all the people that bought in this area will probably push the price even lower and capitulate way below this support level right here. Now, but probably wouldn't have expected this to happen in just a day or just a week, but this is what happened. So I don't know what to say in that regard. Maybe some people saw the crash coming, like a really big crash. I didn't see a big crash coming. I was more like expecting a slow bleed, maybe a little bit of a crash down to this pivot, but that then accelerated substantially, which definitely wasn't something I had expected. Now, if we look at the 50-day moving average, it doesn't tell us much. Maybe if we look at the 300-day moving average, doesn't tell us much. The 200-day moving average doesn't tell us much either, because again, Ethereum was in a different state than Bitcoin because Ethereum had gone a little bit parabolic. So we didn't really have such clean information for Ethereum. If we look at the pivots, the yearly pivots, they don't tell us anything. If we look at the weekly pivots, we just saw that the price had already broken way below those, and there wasn't anything clean in that regard. So sometimes, because I mentioned the pivots earlier, if you're looking at the pivots with altcoins, they might not be as stable, they might not be as clean, because they just tend to have more abrupt moves compared to Bitcoin. Bitcoin has smoother moves. It doesn't really tend to go in the same way that alts go, to just have those weird bursts and those weird charts. The Bitcoin charts are a little bit cleaner than altcoins, so those pivots tend to work better for Bitcoin. Now, the main thing that I would be looking at, guys, again, like with the Bitcoin price, and this is where a lot of the price, a lot of the perpetuals actually started bottoming, was this level right here. The most traded price of Ethereum, at least in Q1, or essentially overall in 2021, was 1,800. And that was a very significant level, because we had this most traded price here. That's what this is indicating. Maybe someone could have said this is pretty big as well, but I would say go step by step. This was potentially the most traded price overall in this area. Plus, another key thing to notice, like I said before about the double bottoms, is that we had this little double bottom over here at around 1,950. And whenever we have those bottoms, guys, we do tend to get big pullbacks, because we didn't just have that double bottom right there. We had some little double bottoms here. We had several untested areas, although, for example, 2,500 was retested in a way. We didn't have a retest on the 2,400 breakout in this little area right here. We didn't have a proper retest at about 1,860, and same goes for 1,730. So what happened for Ethereum compared to what was going on back here was Ethereum, when it was near the all-time high around the 1,300, 1,400 area, it did go up, and then it had a brutal pullback. It was much shorter than this one, but it did actually come all the way back and retest those all-time highs, and then slowly went higher. But when it started leaving that area, it just left, and it just didn't look back. And at the same time, what happened was Ethereum was going up when Bitcoin was really correcting, and when Bitcoin was already topping. Bitcoin had topped, it had already started crashing in a way, and Ethereum didn't really pull back as much along with Bitcoin. So what happened was there were many weak hands that were left in Ethereum. The shakeout wasn't really as good, and what happened was the alt season continued, and most alt seasons usually continue after Bitcoin has already topped. They just have that final leg up. Maybe alt seasons go about a month or maybe a little bit longer after Bitcoin has topped. But at some point, as Bitcoin goes down and maybe money runs out on both sides and people start withdrawing the money, they start selling, then the market actually corrects. So the main thing that I would say, and I mentioned it on the topping signals, is that currently we have had the Bitcoin dominance fall so much in just such a little time frame, such a small time frame, that when we had that double bottom right here, if you can call it this, because the market fell so low, it was almost back to where it was in May of 2018. We did have a pretty strong bounce. Now, I'm not really a fan of the stuff, of the trading stuff on TradingView. That's why I have created a bit my own index. It's not perfect again, but like we saw this top right here, where the Bitcoin dominance on September 18th, September of 2019 was retested in December of 2020. We did have something similar happen this time around, so it had a little bit of a full cycle, and that's why we have had alts top. So if I look at my index, like I mentioned before, the main thing to notice right here is that we did have a pullback all the way into the area that we had that really big increase. So we had this support, that was the last correction that we had, and then we had that very sharp increase. Now, initially, at least alts versus Bitcoin, they had that drop, then the really sharp bounce, and then another drop to kind of put in a little double bottom right here. And in my opinion, that showed that maybe the correction in the short term was complete. But to be honest, I don't really like that structure too much, because most altcoins have been correcting about, at least my index has been showing corrections of about 15 to 16, 17%, all the way back to January of 2021. But since the March pump, we only had a correction of about 16% versus Bitcoin. So alts went up about 130% versus Bitcoin, with only one 15% correction. So at some point it was becoming evident that alts would crash, and they just had all that open air in this area. So the next key level would have been this one right here, that key consolidation level, where alts had that final big move once that was broken and got retested. So that was pretty large. A 30% correction for altcoins, that's also very, very large. If you see something like a correction of alts versus Bitcoin that's more than 20%, guys, that's usually a sign that the market is really oversold, especially if Bitcoin is correcting as well. Now, if alts are correcting versus Bitcoin because Bitcoin is going up, then they might keep going lower and lower and lower. So it doesn't mean that they're gonna the bottom anytime soon. But if alts drop 30% versus Bitcoin, and Bitcoin also drops another 30%, that's something that you need to be aware of and understand that potentially the market has been really, really overbought, and the price is going to bounce, oversold, and the market is going to bounce at some point soon. The other indicator that was very clean to me was that we actually touched the 50-day moving average. And the only times that we've actually touched the 50-day moving average, guys, within this bull market, at least for alts, has been on March 25th of 2021 and the 20th of May. So that was another big sign for me that the market was going to bottom at some point pretty soon. Now we can also see that maybe the pivots didn't really give us anything very specific other than the weekly pivot. So we had that nice combination here. For example, in Bitcoin, that combination didn't really work with the 200-day, with the monthly S3, and even the weekly S3 on the CME futures. I'm going to mention them pretty soon. But when you have support like this one, you have the moving average, you also have the S3 pivot, and you drop 30%, that's a very, very nice place to be looking for a bottom. So when you see these combinations of different indicators, that's the time to start looking for a potential bounce. Now, maybe you don't want to use my little index, you want to use the Bitcoin dominance. You can see that the Bitcoin dominance just came back to the place that it had that final move down, and that's just fine. You know what I mean? Like, you can also buy some alts when you see that their price is very, very oversold versus Bitcoin. Currently, maybe the alt season is over, guys. So, you know, all the stuff that I say are just mostly for just the bounce. And then if you start seeing more strength, more signs later on, then you can keep on buying if you still believe that altcoins will go up. And finally, I'm just going to look a little bit at the Ethereum BTC price, because I do believe that one has a lot of information as well. What you can see in this one right here is that Ethereum had that top all the way back to that previous high from 2018. We just had a full cycle in this situation right here. And we could potentially come back to those levels right there. Maybe that happens because Bitcoin is the only one going up. That's still a possibility. That's still a relatively likely scenario in my opinion. But the main thing that I want to look at right now is that Ethereum just pulled back, like with the Bitcoin dominance, down to this key level right here. We had that big push higher. So the next level you would be looking to be buying is this one right here. Now you could also be thinking about some place to sell on the bounce, like in this area here as well. That's a very cool one too, because once you have that very sharp move up, you kind of know that potentially this is not going to continue higher. So if you want to short this move, you had a very clean area that was support for a really long time. That definitely looks like a head and shoulders pattern right here at about 0.075. So that's the one. So you can see this very clearly right here. So you have that head and shoulders pattern that dropped. The target was definitely higher than we actually bottomed, but the price had a nice pullback down to those untested levels. So the market just pulled back all the big increase I had versus Bitcoin. So when that happens, we usually do know that the market has been cleaned, at least from leverage. We have had a substantial correction. Now, I don't really know if there are any other indicators you could be looking at right here, because again, these are a little bit more weird on the way they move. So there aren't really anything to be looking at for now, because again, remember that if Bitcoin has a very sharp move down and alts have a relatively sharp move down versus Bitcoin as well, then that's already too much. It's already too much. So now let's look at the stuff that I said about the CME. I do think that there are some nice information to get from here as well, because look at this, guys. When I was mentioning the CME, there was a nice support combo because the weekly pivot for CME was actually right here as well. And we had that very nice support level. We had that little nice gap, but once that broke, we had that very, very big capitulation. Now, if we look at the 200-day moving average on the CME, it's very different from the moving average on Bitcoin, because CME is open for 5 days a week, whereas Bitcoin is 24/7 market. It's very, very different. So we did also see the CME come all the way down here as well. Now, it wasn't the perfect bottom, at least on the 200-day moving average, but it was still pretty good, and it gave us a pretty nice signal that, you know, market is getting really oversold right now. I'm not really showing you guys anything about the RSI because I don't really believe there are that many things somebody can look at the RSI. Now, maybe you can see that it was oversold and it got really oversold, but you cannot really time anything with the RSI. And even the CME chart is looking pretty different from the chart on Bitcoin, because the CME chart this time it got oversold for real. But look at how much more it dropped after it was oversold. And that's not a great sign, because usually that only happens in bear markets. I'm not going to go through the topping signals or anything like it again. I do recommend you guys listen back to it, because I did mention some stuff regarding the bottoms as well. Now, of course, the market could be heading back down to those levels. If the market comes down, guys, to the previous all-time highs, that would be perfect, at least when the CME got launched. Because currently we do have those gaps still left open. There are many gaps left open on the CME chart, which might get filled. We have the untested level there. So we have 18K, we've got 17K, we've got 24 all the way up to 26K that could be tested. We have that nasty double bottom that I really don't like, and I've mentioned that many times before. So who knows, maybe the correction keeps going lower, but if it goes down to those levels, guys, I do believe we're going to have a very sharp bounce and the market is going to bottom at some point soon when it gets there. So even if we get a bear market, I do believe we're going to see some bounces pretty soon. You can also see that 3,500 was also a nice place to be buying those CME futures after the first bounce. So if you miss one, guys, don't be scared and just stay out forever. Like, wanting to see the wipeout, just look for that second little correction. Don't step in right after the really big bounce, like in this situation, because after a big move down and a sharp move up, there will be usually a little pullback afterwards. Now, if we start seeing the market break above those levels right here, then it probably means that it's going to go higher. Now, these gaps also tell me that this is a pretty cool move for more upside, because this gap might get filled. We also have this untested area right there, which might also get filled. Now, I'm just going to have a little look and go back to the March crash and even before that, because as you can see here, for example, because I mentioned that on Bitcoin, on the Bitcoin chart in the previous video, look at how perfectly this actually bottomed right at the previous highs, right exactly at where the big pump started. Now, many of these gaps do get filled, guys, like you can see in this major gap in 2019. But when we have so many gaps like we had this time around, potentially all of them might get filled with a nasty move down. However, currently I do feel like, to an extent at least, we're in a bit of a situation like this one, where we have had a major gap. We have had an area that hasn't been retested at about 47, 48k and 53, 54k. And those might be retested fairly soon because we've already crashed. Like you can see in this area, the market did chop around a little bit. We had that nice bounce over there. Then we had some really weird price action. We had some gaps up, we had some gaps down, but overall the market kept going higher afterwards. So this is a very strange cycle. This is very different from many of the other ones. I'm going to talk about it on future videos as well, because I don't want to make this too long. It's already going for about 20 minutes. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that after such a crash, you do get that chop at the bottom and then potentially go higher. However, I'm just going to go back a little bit into altcoins, because now that I've showed you guys what happened in that period, I want to tell you something about what also happened with the Bitcoin price and the altcoin price back then. So alts had that very big correction against Bitcoin. Okay, initially alts had already been falling along with Bitcoin back then, because alts had a mini alt season, then the COVID situation happened, so alts started correcting both versus Bitcoin and USD as Bitcoin was going down. Then Bitcoin had that very sharp move up, had a very sharp move down, so alts had a little bit of a capitulation. The Bitcoin dominance went higher, then alts went higher for a little bit, but then they kept falling as Bitcoin dominance kept rising. Now back then we had the halving, so that was something that actually pushed alts lower, but of course the same situation doesn't hold true now. However, because alts had already been trading for so long, and this is the largest correction alts have had, maybe alts take a little bit of a break here, and it's time for Bitcoin, because like I said on the topping videos, 4.5 months of Altseason is not the best thing. So again, this time around, maybe focusing on Bitcoin is the best thing to do rather than focusing on altcoins. But if you were just looking to spot the bottom, you can also see right here, there was that little breakdown in the Bitcoin dominance. Once that was retested as Bitcoin dominance was going higher, alts went higher as well. But that was because there was a crash, then alts did pretty well, and then they continued the downside. Of course, that was a bottom that alts had already fallen way too much. They were not so elevated like they are now. Just some stuff to keep in mind. Although the market could easily continue lower, I would just be a little bit more cautious, because the trend is still up for alts. We saw it with the 50-day moving average, we've seen it with Ethereum, we've seen it with so many other tools. However, because things have changed a little bit, I'll be more cautious right now. So the next one, guys, is going to be the stablecoin index and the market cap index, the ratio of the two. So if we look back, guys, we have seen that there have been more and more stablecoins pouring into the market. So this is not the best way to start like tracking the stablecoin index. So the main thing I'm looking at right now is this area right here, where if the stablecoin price, the stablecoin ratio keeps going lower and lower and lower, the lower it goes, the more likely it is that we will get eventually a bounce. Now, there are many reasons why stablecoins are flowing into the market, which is margin trading, leverage trading, futures trading, perpetual swaps. We also maybe have some options at some point soon, IEOs, ICOs, IDOs. So, there are many different reasons why these stablecoins are flowing into the market. But the key thing to notice here is that although, yes, yield farming is the main one, the main reason that stablecoins do flow into the market, you have to remember that many times people already have that money into the crypto market. So this is like buying power sitting on the sidelines. So eventually, at some point, yields do drop along with prices. So the more people start yield farming, the more people get bearish, the more likely it is at some point those yields will get low, and then that money might start flowing back into Bitcoin and altcoins once again. So currently we did hit those lows, and in my opinion we actually went way lower than those lows, because here it seems like the correction wasn't really that big, although in my opinion it was way larger. So I don't really believe that that week was only 17%. Same goes for the capitulation back in March of 2020, because the coin market cap data don't really track those very nicely. They're not very precise when it comes to what the average price actually was. So they have their own way of measuring stuff. So in my opinion, that made a new low. And you might be asking, why am I looking at the total market cap and not the Bitcoin market cap like many others do? Look, I do believe that Glassnode and CryptoQuant and others, they make the same mistake. They look at Bitcoin in isolation, whereas they should be looking at the whole crypto market as a whole. I mentioned that before regarding, for example, the movement of coins on chain from the Bitcoin Cash fork, Segwit and so on, which they don't take into account, they never mention. So it's kind of good to keep track of why certain things have happened rather than look at them blindly. Now, it's very clear, and it has been clear, that the market was already losing steam for quite some time. It just showed that more and more people want to do yield farming. Maybe more and more people were actually speculating on perpetual swaps. So the market wasn't really in that healthy state that many people might have expected, because as far as I remember, maybe the total open interest on altcoins reached more than 40 billion, which is a pretty insane number. Now, if we include derivatives like options as well, it was even higher. But most of the open interest was actually on those swaps, on the perpetual swaps, and they actually got very, very high. So for now, in my opinion, yes, there is more downside, but because we have hit that critical support level where when we touched that the last time, we did go higher, we did have a bounce. I do believe there might be a little bounce, but overall I do expect it to go a little lower before we bottom once again. I don't know how much lower, but I do believe that the more money comes in the market and stays into crypto for yield farming or for any other reason, the more likely it is that the market will go higher slowly but surely. Then I'm just going to look at the Bitcoin volatility, guys, BVOL. So this one is another great indicator from BitMEX, in my opinion. Well, it's not an indicator, it just tracks the volatility. But what I mean by indicator is that once there is such a big spike, that's usually it. And historically, this move up has historically signaled either a top or a bottom. Even though it might be in the short term only, maybe volatility goes down a little bit from here and that's just it. But as you can see, after the March crash, when you have such a volatile event, usually that's the bottom. We also saw that on the 11th of January. That was when the Bitcoin market was correcting very, very sharply, and at least we got a very sharp bounce. So once again, if you start seeing the volatility go above those highs right there, if the volatility index goes above maybe 17 or even lower, I should say, maybe when it starts going above 16, then you should start looking to buy or even maybe look to sell if that volatility is on the upside. So if that volatility happens because Bitcoin is pumping or Bitcoin was pumping really hard and just corrected, then it's a good price to maybe sell, or after the bounce, sell. So I think, guys, I should be ending the video here because it has gotten way too long. I promised you more stuff, but this has already gone overboard. Hopefully you will see the timestamps and realize that this is way too long, and I'm just gonna make another one very soon and continue with the rest of the stuff that I promised, which are open interest, long short ratios. We're gonna track the premiums, the ratios, all that stuff. We're also going to look at certain indicators like stock to flow, NVT, SOPR, and so on. So make sure you watch the next one as well, because it's going to be a very cool video, guys. And hope you enjoyed this one. A lot of information, might be a bit too heavy. I would recommend you go back and watch some of the stuff again and again, because the main reason that I'm making these videos are not just to tell you guys that this is the main top or the main bottom, but mostly to help you guys navigate the markets when it comes to certain events like this one. So once again guys, thanks a lot for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you liked something, if you didn't like something, tell me your thoughts. Please also press the bell icon if you subscribe to the channel so that you can get the notifications. Usually I'm not making that many videos, so you're not gonna get that many notifications. They're gonna be a lot less than they are now. You can also follow me on Twitter, you can follow me on Telegram, and you can follow me on TradingView as well, where I share more setups and ideas, so you can get more quality content on there as well. So once again, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.